Okay, so Ultraman's a fighting game based on the series Ultraman Towards the Future. It was originally released in arcades by Ben Presto and Bandai, but was then ported to the Super Nintendo. It was also ported to the Mega Drive 2 years later than the SNES, but this Mega Drive version only came out in Japan. Now, I remember seeing this game all over the place back in the day. It was in so many shops and it was always cheap. And I have to admit, I loved a lot of old-fashioned sort of Japanese TV. I'd loved things like Astro Boy, and I'd also loved something called Spectral Man, which is very much on the same sort of lines as Ultraman. It's a guy who becomes a superhero, adopts a sort of golden cosmonaut's mask thing, and receives orders from aliens. In fact, it was one of the first videos my dad ever brought me, and it was a guy fighting giant monkeys. But I never brought Ultraman, because there was just this kind of legend of its awfulness. Everybody had heard of it, and it was one of those games that people just generally shouted abuse at and stayed away from, even though they'd never played it. So, obviously, before I started reviewing this game, I knew that it was considered to be legendarily bad, and that it was one of the games that has often been given the title of worst game ever, or worst game on the Super Nintendo, and basically other titles that say this game's not a turd. I have to admit, one thing which is annoying about a lot of gamers, and even games-based media however, is the fact that people talk about games like this without ever having played them. Much in the way that when you ask most people what's the worst game ever, they'll throw out answers like E.T. on the Atari 2600 or Superman 64 without ever having seen the cartridge in real life. So with the above said, you'll probably get the point that even if a game has been called bad by almost everyone and every media outlet, then I still like to put it in my own cartridge slot or CD drawer before I'm willing to comment on it. I don't like to just jump on the bandwagon without any sort of real in-depth play of my own. I've played E.T., I've played Superman 64, and now I've played Ultraman. I'd like to be able to tell you that some of its awfulness is just the product of an ever-expanding urban legend, that people have tried to one-up each other with tales of how awful it is, and in doing so exaggerated some of its issues. But unfortunately, everything that has ever been said about this game is true. It's awful. I know that's probably not the most professional way to start a review, by instantly almost giving an opinion, so I'm going to run you through my time with the game a little bit. I'll give you a quick explanation of how I got to this point of despising this thing. Now, as I said, I didn't get it back in the day, but I saw it in a charity shop, and I think it was only like £4 or £5, complete boxed, and this was like not too long back. About a year, which obviously for a SNES game is pretty darn impressive. So when I got home, I put the game in the slot and loaded it up. The music was okay, the presentation wasn't that bad, but then I got to the gameplay. For those of you who don't know who Ultraman is, I'll give you a basic idea of what he is. Imagine a one-man Power Ranger team where instead of getting into a giant robot, if enemies turn big, the dude just turns big himself, and well, that's pretty much all you need to know. So you see a scene of him growing, and then it's time to fight. At first you see Ultraman facing off against a monster, and you see the power bars with names on under both sides of the screen. Yours one side, the monster the other, and this makes you think, oh, we're in the land of Street Fighter 2 clones again. If only this game was as good as even an average Street Fighter clone. Ultraman controls like he has some kind of serious impairment. The way he moves backwards and forwards, it's clunky. You can never seem to back off quick enough. Though you can do a sort of backwards cartwheel, you can run forward quite fast. The game makes you realise things which are brilliant in the likes of Street Fighter 2, which you took for granted. It makes you realise these could have been far, far worse. The jumping in Ultraman's controlled with one of the pad's face buttons, but it's so floaty that jump attacks are hardly worth bothering with. In fact, the only point to jumping would be to jump over the enemy to gain yourself a bit of breathing room. The other three face buttons, well, one's a punch, one's a kick, and the third is your special move button. This is where things get a bit more complicated. On my first go, I managed to punch and kick the monster until its energy bar was depleted. This was a chore, as there are only basically two kinds of punch, a straight punch, an uppercut style punch, and two kicks, a straight kick and a little jumping fancy kick. Yes, there are no real crouching attacks, different kicks or punches just don't seem to happen if you hold back or press the button up for longer or anything. So they're basically 4 standard attacking moves. 6 if you count the fact that you can chop or kick while in the air. I say if you can count these, as if you do them they'll hardly ever hit anything. So we have finish him showing up written in the enemy's depleted energy bar. So I hit him a lot more and he hits me back, lowering my energy. I press the special button and a sort of fireball attack is launched, which hits him but doesn't do anything much. 5 minutes later he's beaten my bar down to 0. Do I carry on like he has and wait for him to finish me? No, I collapse to the floor and die. So I continue and the same thing happens again and again. At this point it's safe to say I was frustrated. I knew that I was going to have to do one of two things. I was either going to have to open the manual or I was going to have to dive online. Now something's wrong when you feel the need to run for help during what, to all intents and purposes, is the first stage of a video game. It turned out that the answer was halfway through the manual. There's a meter in between yours and his which shows how much special energy you have, and it also displays some choices. As you gain more energy, you can choose other special moves. You actually have 4 of them, and when it says finish him, only one thing will kill the enemy, and that's to hit them with the 4th special move. So now with this knowledge in hand, I again did battle with the first monster. I wore down his energy bar and hit him with the move, and bam, he blew up. Job done. I soon learned that the problem is that you need to beat the enemy up quite a bit to fill your bar, so there's basically no point using the special moves apart from to use the 4th one to blow up the enemy, because if you do use the other ones, it will just mean that you're dancing backwards and forwards, kicking the enemy while it says finish him, waiting to gain the needed energy, giving the enemy a chance to kill you while you do so. That's the main problem. The enemies have better reach than you do, they also seem to move more quickly than you do, and they can kill you by simply depleting your energy bar without having to do any fancy rubbish to see you off. Add to this the fact that their attacks seem to be very quick and damaging, and you can see your plight. When you win, it's often not because of how good you've been, it's because the random gods of chance have shone in your favour. In one match against an enemy, he can breathe fire at you again and again, as well as hitting you before you can even reach him. Then in your next match, he just seems to stand there while you approach and punch him in the face again and again. It just feels like the enemies don't have any real AI, and instead some dice are being thrown in the background, the result of which tells them to attack, to shoot fire, or just to sit there like a lemon. Apparently there's about 8 monsters in the game, but I couldn't get past the 5th one. Its reach was just too good. It kept shooting fire and I didn't have the patience to wait for it to keep rolling lemons. Add to this the fact that you get a limited amount of continues, you get about 2, but I did notice myself gaining an extra one due to a point score at one stage. The graphics in game are rubbish, basic backgrounds, awful sprites, but this could be overlooked if the game wasn't such a sluggish random mess. As it stands, I have to give this game 2 out of 10. It's basically broken, but kind of has some degree of playability, hence the fact I haven't given it a 1. It's by far the worst SNES game I've played during this little experiment of mine, and I can't remember playing anything else this bad back in the day. I do own another game which was frequently referred to as the worst game on the SNES, so we'll have to wait and see how that measures up. If you love bad games or you're some kind of sadomasochist who's rubbing their nipples at the thought of playing this, then I'll give you the lowdown on how much it costs. As said earlier, my copy was around £5 from a charity shop box with manual, and I still feel that's pretty expensive for what this is. The cheapest PAL copy I could find online was £5.99, but it looked like a bear had attacked the front label. There was a box copy or two for £15, but seriously, buy some good games with that money. Honestly, when recording the footage for this review, I've actually recorded the footage a lot later than I played the game. I've obviously probably looked better in the footage because I knew all the special movie, how to finish them, but I was sat there cringing playing it again, and I was just basically saying, please recording software, work, record this properly, because I can't bear to have to sit and try and do this again. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, hope you enjoyed this review.